If your family is from St. Ann, the place your grandparents called home may be holding clues about your ancestry that go back far beyond the family stories you grew up hearing. Because St. Ann is not just one of Jamaica's parishes, it is one of the places where some of the island's oldest stories, hardest histories, and most complicated family lines came together. And if your family has been in St. Ann for generations, there is a good chance your ancestry is more layered than you realize. This is not simply a story about where your family lives. It is a story about who was here before them, who arrived later, who was forced here, who disappeared from the records, and how all of those people eventually became part of Jamaican families. St. Ann sits along Jamaica's north coast, stretching from the sea into the interior hills. Today, people know it for places like Ocho Rios, Brownstown, Discovery Bay, and St. Ann's Bay. But long before these places became modern Jamaican communities, this region was part of the world of the Taino, the indigenous people who lived across Jamaica before European colonization. Jamaica's first parishes were created in the 17th century, and St. Ann was one of the original parishes. That means when you say your family is from St. Ann, you're talking about a place with centuries of human history underneath the modern family tree. And some of that history may still be hiding in your DNA, but not in the way people sometimes imagine. Your DNA cannot simply tell you your family is from St. Ann. Instead, it can reveal pieces of the populations and migration patterns that contributed to your ancestry. And St. Ann gives us some fascinating clues. Before British Jamaica, indigenous Taino communities lived across the island. Then came Spanish colonization. Then, in 1655, the English captured Jamaica and began transforming the island into a British colony. What followed would change Jamaica forever. Plantations expanded, sugar became enormously important, and Africans were forcibly brought to Jamaica through the Atlantic slave trade. St. Ann became part of that plantation economy. But here's something important. When people imagine plantation history, they sometimes picture only the enormous sugar estates. The reality was more complicated. There were plantations, pens, farms, villages, markets, churches, roads, and small communities. People moved. Families separated and reunited. People escaped. People formed relationships. Children were born. And names changed. That's one reason tracing a Jamaican family back through St. Ann can be so difficult. The records were not created to preserve the family stories of ordinary Jamaicans. Many were created for churches, plantation owners, courts, government officials, or colonial administration. And yet, those same records can contain extraordinary clues. The Jamaica Archives and Records Department holds historical materials, including parish registers, slave registers, manumission records, maps, wills, court records, tax rolls, and other documents covering centuries of Jamaican history. And St. Ann has some particularly revealing records. One surviving St. Ann Parish Register contains baptism entries from 1806 in which enslaved people were recorded with names, ages, former names, and the names of the people or properties to which they were assigned. Read that again in your mind. A person could appear in a record under one name and then be baptized under another. A child could be recorded separately from a parent, and the document could preserve the name of a plantation or owner, while telling us almost nothing about the person's own life. That's the kind of historical puzzle your ancestors may have left behind. And then there are the slave registers. Records from 1817 document enslaved people on several St. Ann properties, including those associated with Hamilton Brown, Sarah Duncan, and Angus Campbell. The registers recorded information such as age and whether individuals were African-born or born in Jamaica. Imagine what that means for someone researching a St. Ann family today. You may have a great-grandparent whose family always said, "We've been in St. Ann forever." That might sound like a simple statement, but forever can mean several generations, or it can mean that your family remained in the same region while the generations before them moved between estates, villages, and neighboring parishes. And sometimes the records reveal something completely unexpected. Imagine standing in St. Ann 200 years ago. The air is warm. You can hear people working nearby. A church bell sounds in the distance. Someone is walking along a rough road toward a market. A child is being carried home. And somewhere, a clerk is opening a register and writing down a name. That name might look ordinary, but that single entry could become the thread connecting a family living today to people who lived through one of the most dramatic periods in Jamaican history. That's what makes genealogy so powerful. The smallest record can sometimes lead to the biggest discovery, and if your family comes from St. Ann, you may have more than one ancestry story waiting to be uncovered. The first possibility is African ancestry. For many Jamaican families, especially those whose roots extend into the plantation era, this may represent the largest part of the ancestral story. But even here, the story isn't simple. The people brought to Jamaica came from different parts of West and West Central Africa, and their descendants developed new communities and identities on the island. Then there is European ancestry. British colonization brought people from England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and other parts of Europe into Jamaican society. Some became landowners. Some worked in administration or commerce. Others arrived in completely different circumstances. Over generations, European ancestry became part of many Jamaican family lines. And then there is indigenous ancestry. This is where we need to be especially careful. Jamaica's Taino population was devastated after European colonization through disease, violence, enslavement, and displacement. That does not mean every Jamaican family from St. Ann has indigenous ancestry. It means the indigenous history of the region is part of the population history that existed before the families we recognize today. And there may be another layer. The Maroons, runaway Africans, formed communities in Jamaica's interior, and the history of these communities became particularly important in the island's mountainous regions. St. Ann's geography connects it to the broader interior of northern Jamaica, where movement between communities could make family histories much harder to follow. People did not live their entire lives inside neat parish boundaries. They moved for work. They moved after marriage. They moved after emancipation. They moved because of land, and sometimes they moved simply because they had to. That is why the phrase, "My family is from St. Ann," is only the beginning of the investigation. And this is exactly why I created my book, The Bloodline Code: What Your DNA Reveals About Ancestry, Ancient Origins, Hidden Traits, and Human Evolution. Because when you combine DNA with surnames, historical records, migration patterns, and family documents, you can begin to see how the pieces fit together. If you want to explore those connections more deeply, the Bloodline Code is available through the link in the channel description and the pinned comment. But DNA has to be handled carefully. A DNA test doesn't give you a perfect historical biography. It doesn't tell you the name of your fifth great-grandmother. And it certainly doesn't mean that every percentage on a DNA report represents one specific ancestor. What DNA can do is provide evidence about genetic relationships and ancestry patterns. Autosomal DNA can help you identify relatives and broad ancestral connections. Y-DNA can help investigate a direct paternal line. Mitochondrial DNA can follow a direct maternal line. And when those results are combined with actual records, they can become much more powerful. Imagine discovering that the family story you heard as a child was only half right. Maybe your ancestors really did remain around St. Ann for generations. But then you discover a marriage record connecting the family to another parish. Then a baptism record reveals another generation. Then a land document appears. Then DNA connects you to relatives you never knew existed. Suddenly, the family tree isn't a straight line anymore. It's a web, and that's probably a better way to understand Jamaican ancestry, because Jamaican families were not created from one migration. They were created through centuries of movement and change. African, European, Indigenous, Caribbean, and sometimes ancestry from places that don't appear anywhere in the family stories. Here's the twist. Being from St. Ann doesn't necessarily tell you where your ancestors came from. It tells you where part of their story happened. That distinction is enormous. Your ancestors may have arrived in St. Ann from another part of Jamaica. Their parents may have been born somewhere else. Their grandparents may have been born in Africa. Another branch may have come through Europe. And somewhere along the way, those different histories became one family, your family. So if your family is from St. Ann, don't just search for your surname. Search for the people. Search the parish registers. Search baptism and marriage records. Search wills. Search land records. Search emancipation and manumission documents. Search the names of grandparents and great-grandparents, and pay attention to the places they lived, because sometimes the parish itself is the clue. The Jamaica Archives specifically preserves St. Ann public local records, including historical administrative materials, while the National Library of Jamaica holds surviving court records from St. Ann dating from 1787 into the 19th century. Those records can reveal a Jamaica that looks very different from the one we see today. They can reveal names, families, property, conflict, resistance, migration, and survival. And if your family has roots in St. Ann, some of those stories may belong to you. Not because every story will be dramatic, but because every generation left something behind. A name, a place, a marriage, a child, a grave, a piece of land, a photograph, a memory, and sometimes a DNA connection. That's why St. Ann is more than a parish on a map. For many Jamaican families, it may be one of the places where several different ancestral journeys finally came together. So the next time someone tells you, "Our family is from St. Ann," don't just ask which part of St. Ann. Ask how long they've been there. Ask where their parents came from. Ask what surnames appear in the oldest family records. Ask which church their ancestors attended. Ask where the grandparents were buried, and if the records take you back far enough, ask the biggest question of all. Who were the people before the family story began? Because St. Ann's history didn't begin with our grandparents. It didn't begin with emancipation. It didn't begin with the plantations, and it certainly didn't begin with the modern towns we know today. Generation after generation, people came, people moved, people survived, and people built families. And somewhere inside that long history is your story. If your family is from St. Ann, you may not have inherited just a place. You may have inherited the evidence of centuries of migration, survival, and human connection. And the deeper you look, the more you may realize that your family's story was never as simple as you were told. St. Ann may be where your family lived, but it may also be where several worlds became one. And the question is, what would your DNA reveal if you could follow every branch of your family tree